Our next speaker is a name we've already heard mentioned this morning, a scientist who is internationally recognized in this area. Professor Pierre-Louis Toutain is the professor of physiology and therapeutics at the National Veterinary School of Toulouse, having been in the same post previously at Maison Alfort. He is also a visiting professor at Royal Veterinary College in London. He is a member of the European College of Veterinary Pharmacology and Toxicology. He has been president of that, and today is vice president of the European Association for Veterinary Pharmacology and Toxicology. He's a former chairman of the Pharmacokinetics Working Party for the European Horse Race Liaison Scientific Committee. He's been on the scientific board of the French National Stud, has been on the French Agency for Food Safety, and was head of the unit of experimental pathophysiology and toxicology at the National Institute for Agronomical Research. He is the former deputy chairman of the Animal Health Department. This is a very wide and diverse experience, and this morning Professor Toutain is going to tell us how to use irrelevant plasma and urine drug concentrations in doping control in the FEI. Professor, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, for this very nice introduction. It's also my pleasure to be here, and I will do my best to explain how we proceed in our scientific committee for racing and to do how to extrapolate our procedure for FEI. I will explain how we decide an international screening limits using a risk analysis approach. 3 steps: risk assessment, risk management, risk communication. The risk assessment is a purely scientific exercise by scientists. At that level, we compute irrelevant plasma concentration and irrelevant urine concentration. And the scientific job is stopped here. Then, step 2, risk management. It is a decision step by risk manager, and they decide what is the international screening limits. Finally, and it is very important also, risk communication, because we have to keep informed all stakeholders that what we are doing. And for the risk communication, the main piece of communication that we release is detection time. That is totally different of a withdrawal time. I will explain that at the end of my presentation. So, before to explain what is the science supporting our decision making, I would like to say that any doping politics should be found also set the values. We have not a science ready for use without any value. Science is universal, but ethics is not universal. What is good for racing industry cannot be good, for example, for jumping, etc. So, at FEI, we have to accept that science is not able to resolve all your choice. You have to make your decision using some other arguments. Before to explore how FEI can use international screening limits that we determine, I will explain how, you have to formally express what is your set of value. And the risk for FEI, in my opinion, is to raise a question that is mainly an ethical nature and to attempt to solve it using scientific arguments. Science and ethics are two different issues. So, what is a clean sport? I don't know exactly what you consider what is a clean sport. It is only level playing field. For example, if all horses are under phenylbutazone, you can say they're equal. But you have also to protect animal welfare. You have perhaps also to protect a business model. So all these things are different, and we have to express that before to use science. Now I will explain how we proceed for racing authorities to determine a screening limit. The value of our association is we don't want to see any drugs, any substance during the race or during the training, but we accept good veterinary practice. So we have to determine a politics in which we distinguish clearly exposure, the control of any drug exposure or any substance exposure for illicit substance, versus drug effect for medication. And it is clearly separated. Before to explain that, I would like to show a curve. It is a generic curve for any drugs. If you inject a drug here, for example, at the beginning the decay is very quick, then a little bit more slow, and finally very slow. It is true for any drugs. If your analytical technique is here, for example, 20 years ago, the detection time here is about 5 hours, and the half-life is very short. If now your analytical technique is here, you can detect this drug for 2 days. And if your analytical technique is somewhere here, you can detect for 20 days. So we have to decide where to stop. It's not the machines that decide where to stop. For phenylbutazone, the first presentation, it has been said the half-life is between 4 and 6 hours. Actually, this is this half-life here. But for doping control, we have to consider this one. And this one is much more longer. It's about 24 hours, explaining the detection time for phenylbutazone is quite long. So, our politics consists to separate unacceptable drugs, and for that, the analytical technique should be the best as possible, but they are totally unsuitable for therapeutic substance, and I have to explain how we proceed. About 15 years ago, EHSLC said how to avoid to detect trace level of drugs without pharmacological effect, without relevant pharmacological effect. And I proposed at that time a general approach that is termed now a PK/PD approach. I have no time to explain that. I published this paper. It is quite complicated, but the spirit of that is very simple. I will explain that. Okay. Yes. This is the first step of the risk analysis, and I explained at the beginning of my presentation. We have to follow this risk analysis when you have some competitive interest in order to be transparent in your decision and to take unbiased decision. Okay? And I would like to use the example of phenylbutazone. The risk assessment, it is the first step to determine what is effective plasma concentration, effective plasma concentration, irrelevant plasma concentration, and irrelevant urine concentration. Any dose, this is a single equation in my presentation, is a product of 3 parameters. Plasma clearance, effective plasma concentration, it is precisely what we need to know, and bioavailability. Bioavailability is the extent of absorption. Clearance is the capacity of the host to eliminate a drug. We know plasma clearance for practically all drugs. So, if you know what is the effective dose, if you know what is plasma clearance, if you know bioavailability, it's very, very easy to estimate. You can very easily, by solving this equation, to know effective plasma concentration. This is a PK/PD approach, consisting, in fact, to set the effective plasma concentration. This is the effective dose used by clinician divided by plasma clearance. On doing that, you obtain a very simple value. For example, for phenylbutazone, the standard dose is about 4 milligrams per kilogram per 24 hours. Plasma clearance is about 1,000 milliliters per kilo per 24 hours. And if you divide the dose used by clinician by plasma clearance, you obtain an average plasma concentration. 4.4 micrograms per mil means currently this is the average plasma concentration that is used by clinician. And I will explain from my PK/PD experiment that I conducted about 20 years ago. I found approximately the same value. This is from the literature, this is experimental. And it is clear, if you decide to keep 8 micrograms per milliliter, it's above what is currently an effective plasma concentration. So, I performed also 25 years ago this experiment using a carpitis to determine directly what is the effective plasma concentration. Okay? And from this model, I generate this kind of curve. It was shown that phenylbutazone have a very steep dose-effect relationship. For a small dose, there is few effects. For 2 milligrams per kilograms, you obtain a maximal possible effect. This is a straight length, okay? And if you increase the dose, you don't increase efficacy, as has been explained before, but only the duration of effect. And roughly speaking, the duration of effect is about 12 or 16 hours, explaining you're obliged to repeat the dose to cover all the day. I do the same thing for flunixin. For flunixin, the same things. You have a maximum effect at 1 milligrams per kilo, but if you use 2 milligrams per kilo, in fact, you increase only the duration of action. Okay, we know now what is an effective plasma concentration, how to transform an effective plasma concentration to an irrelevant plasma concentration. For that, you need to divide effective plasma concentration by a safety factor. And the question here is how to fix this safety factor. To fix the safety factors, you need two kinds of consideration: scientific consideration and value consideration. Scientific consideration, for example, what is the shape of the dose-effect relationship, what is the class of the drug, etc. I don't pay attention to that. But for value consideration, for racing authorities, they said, we don't want any effect. But what is the meaning of no effect? I fixed the value to 2% of the maximal possible effect. So the safety factor that I propose historically is to have only 2% of the possible maximal effect. Okay, doing that, you have to divide the effective plasma concentration by 50. On doing that, you transform an effective plasma concentration into an irrelevant plasma concentration for an average horse. Now, I include another factor here, 10, meaning the default factor was 500, because we have to take into account inter-individual horse variability. For racing, it's very important. The level playing field is very important. Equity during the race. We have to guarantee that all horses are under effective plasma concentration. And it is, I cannot explain why we select 10. It's 3.3 multiplied by 3.3 because we have two sources of variability: pharmacokinetics variability, pharmacodynamics variability, and it is a factor of 10. So, if you divide now the effective plasma concentration by 500, you obtain what is an ineffective plasma concentration for all horses. We guarantee a population value here. And when you round up that, it's about 10. Now, up until now, we control mainly urine. And we have to transform an irrelevant plasma concentration to an irrelevant urine concentration. This is quite straightforward. You have only to know what is the ratio between plasma and urine. For example, if the ratio in steady state condition is 10, you multiply irrelevant plasma concentration by 10 to obtain irrelevant urine concentration. For phenylbutazone, it's roughly 1. So the irrelevant urine concentration for phenylbutazone for all horses is 10 micrograms per mil. Now, the job of the scientist is finished. We have now the second step, it is risk management. Risk management, we have to decide, not to compute, what is the international screening limits in order for laboratory, as Yves Bonner said, to make, where is the threshold, in fact, but it's not a threshold. It is an instruction that we give to all labs involved in our programs in order to screen the presence of different drugs, including phenylbutazone. Okay. Risk management is performed by risk manager. And they have to take into account not only scientific argument, as what is an irrelevant plasma concentration, but all other kind of the factors. For example, harmonization is very important for us. I will give an example. Risk management is not a scientific exercise, but should be scientifically sound. Okay? And they start with irrelevant urine concentration and irrelevant plasma concentration, and they use a tool to decide what is the international screening limit, and this tool is an ordinal scale. I have no time to explain what is an ordinal scale. It's, in fact, to avoid for a screening limit to have some quantification. Take an example. For example, the scientist said irrelevant urine concentration is 38 nanograms per mil. The risk manager has a choice between 10, 50, 100, etc. And you have to select one of these values for the screening limit. If, for example, you have a big concern with the drug, you can decide it's 10. If you are not big concern, you can decide 50. But if all labs are not able to perform 50, you can decide 100. So the risk manager has to introduce other considerations than scientific consideration to decide. And I think it is mainly at that level that FEI can differentiate its conclusion from those of the European Scientific Committee liaison. Last step, a very important step, is risk communication. Risk communication is not only a diffusion of information, but an exchange of information between authorities and all stakeholders. It has been said in the introduction. It's very important to communicate with rider, trainer, media, etc. For risk communication, we decide to release a detection time. Why? Because to release a screening limit is of no value for a veterinarian. If I said for phenylbutazone, the screening limit, I don't know what is the screening limit. I don't know if it is public or not, Yves. No, it's not public. Okay, we cannot release this information. But we can say, if we screen a regular horse with that, this is the detection time. So the detection time is only a practical information needed by a veterinarian in order to make its own risk analysis. I will explain that. What is exactly a detection time? Oops, sorry. Take an example. We have, for example, a set of 6, 8, or 10 horses, and we measure what is the residual amount of phenylbutazone, for example, in urine. This is the international screening limit, and the detection time is the first time that we observe in this experiment for which all horses are under the international screening limit. So it is only an information. There is no statistical protection on that. It's an order of magnitude to explain about where is our screening limit. For example, for phenylbutazone, we perform some experiment, and FEI use our value. It's about 7 days. In the different experiments conducted on different, several horses, I don't know how many horses, we obtain 7 days. Some people said 7 days is very long. Why? Because the duration of action is about half a day. In fact, the detection time is impacted by 2 factors, the safety factors and the terminal half-life of the drugs. And I compare here 2 safety factors, 100 and 500, to see what is the impact on the detection time. It is clear, it is the half-life of the drugs that is the most important factor. For example, if FEI decide not to use as we use 500. If you use only 100, the detection time should be a little bit shorter, but not much shorter, because the main factor influencing the detection time is the terminal half-life that is not 4 hours for phenylbutazone, but more 24 hours. Finally, for a vet, the detection time is in information, but he has to decide for a given horse what is the withdrawal time. Why? Detection time is in information. Withdrawal time is a precise recommendation for a given horse. Why? Because the detection time may be influenced by a lot of factors. It depends on the horse breed, age, sex, does the drug formulation, what is the dose, what is the body weight of the horse, etc. We cannot guarantee anything for detection time. So the vet has to decide. But how to decide to transform a detection time to a withdrawal time? The best approach should be to have a kind of survey, to have the kind of population kinetics. This does not exist. So I offer another approach consisting to make some simulation using a very well-known technique in risk assessment. It is a Monte Carlo simulation. It has been published this year in the Equine Veterinary Journal. And roughly speaking, for a regular drug, if you multiply the detection time by 1.5, you have probably something that is correct for a withdrawal time. So the withdrawal time should be systematically longer than the detection time. Finally, my conclusion is, I have 2 conclusions for you. You have to express formally what are your values, because this is a key element in your process decision. The second recommendation that I can make, use a risk analysis approach. When we start about 15 years ago to do this business for racing authorities, we don't use risk analysis approach. And the debate were complicated. We mixed decision, science, communication. Now we have a very formal approach. Discussions are much more clear and much more friendly. And probably you have to follow this approach and to make your own risk management. Okay, it is my presentation. I hope to have been clear. Thanks very much for your attention.